The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Willow Kincaid made her way through the bustling San Diego marketplace in the summer of 1878, the whispers following her like persistent flies that she'd long since learned to ignore. At 22, Willow had become accustomed to the sidelong glances, the poorly concealed snickers, and the blatant stares that accompanied her wherever she went. Her size had always been a source of torment, from childhood taunts to adult condescension, but she held her head high nonetheless, clutching her basket of goods with fingers that trembled only slightly. "Miss Kincaid," the butcher nodded as she approached his counter, his voice polite but eyes never quite meeting hers. "The usual cut for your father's dinner," Willow nodded, smoothing down the front of her dress, the fabric stretched taut across her ample figure. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds. And perhaps a bit extra today. Dr. Farley says Papa should be eating more protein to regain his strength." The mention of her father's illness softened the butcher's expression. Judge Harrison Kincaid was well respected in San Diego, even as his health had begun to fail him over the past year. His position had afforded Willow a certain level of protection from the crueler elements of society, but it couldn't shield her from the reality that, as an unmarried woman of her size, most of the town viewed her future prospects as non-existent. "Of course, Miss Kincaid. I'll wrap it up proper." The butcher selected a choice cut, his movements efficient. "How is the judge faring today?" "Better, thank you." The lie came easily to her lips. Her father wasn't better. The consumption was slowly claiming him, and both of them knew the prognosis was grim. But Willow refused to invite pity on top of the judgment she already endured. The transaction complete, Willow turned to leave when a commotion at the other end of the marketplace caught her attention. A group of cowboys had ridden into town, dust-covered and trail-worn. They were laughing loudly, dismounting with the easy confidence of men accustomed to commanding space wherever they went. Willow's gaze caught on one man in particular. Taller than the others, with broad shoulders and a lean frame, he moved with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. His dark hair curled beneath the brim of his hat, and even from a distance, she could see the sharp line of his jaw, covered with several days' worth of stubble. "Zachariah Irving and his crew," the butcher remarked, following her gaze. "They've been driving cattle up from Mexico. Honest men from what I hear, though that Irving fellow keeps to himself. Doesn't say much, but when he does, folks listen." Willow quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. Men like Zachariah Irving existed in a world entirely separate from her own, and she had long ago accepted that fact. She'd overheard her father's friends discussing her unfortunate situation, when they thought she couldn't hear how her intelligence and family name were assets, but her size made her an unlikely prospect for marriage. At first the words had cut deep, but over time, Willow had built walls around her heart, focusing instead on caring for her father and managing their household. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she murmured, gathering her purchases. "I should be getting back to Father." As she moved toward the edge of the marketplace, disaster struck. A young boy racing through the crowd collided with her at full speed. Willow stumbled, her basket flying from her hands, its contents scattering across the dusty ground. Her balance lost, she fell hard, the impact forcing the air from her lungs in an undignified whoosh. The laughter was immediate, rippling through the onlookers like a wave. Mortification burned through Willow as she struggled to right herself, her dress twisted awkwardly around her legs, her hands scrabbling in the dirt. The boy had already disappeared, leaving her to weather the humiliation alone. Then, suddenly, a shadow fell across her. Strong hands gripped her elbows, gently but firmly helping her to her feet. Willow looked up, her cheeks blazing to find herself staring into the most striking pair of green eyes she'd ever seen. "Zachariah Irving. You all right, madam?" His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that suggested he didn't use it often. Willow couldn't speak. Up close, he was even more handsome, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious expression indicated. But what struck her most was the absence of mockery in his gaze. He really looked at her without a trace of the judgment she'd come to expect. Yes, she finally managed, pulling away from his grip once she was steady. "Thank you." He nodded once, then crouched down, efficiently gathering her scattered purchases and returning them to her basket. When he handed it back to her, their fingers brushed momentarily, sending an unexpected shock up her arm. "Zachariah Irving," he said simply. "Willow Kincaid." A flicker of recognition crossed his features. "Judge Kincaid's daughter?" "Yes." She braced herself for the inevitable shift in his demeanor, the subtle retreat once he connected her to her prominent father. Instead, he tipped his hat slightly. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Kincaid." His eyes lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Watch your step. Streets are getting crowded these days." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding back toward his companions, who were watching with poorly concealed curiosity. Willow stood frozen, clutching her basket, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was nothing, she told herself firmly. A simple act of kindness from a stranger who would forget her existence the moment he turned away. Men like Zachariah Irving didn't look twice at women like her. She knew better than to indulge in foolish fantasies. Yet as she made her way home, she couldn't quite shake the memory of those green eyes, looking at her as if she were actually worth seeing. The Kincaid house stood on the outskirts of town, a handsome two-story structure that reflected Judge Kincaid's status without being ostentatious. Willow pushed open the front gate, her encounter in the marketplace already fading as her mind turned to her father's needs. She'd left him sleeping with Mrs. Holloway, their housekeeper, keeping watch. With any luck, he'd still be resting peacefully. "Willow, is that you?" Her father's voice, once commanding enough to silence a rowdy courtroom, now barely carried from his bedroom to the front hall. "Yes, Papa." Willow handed her basket to Mrs. Holloway, who had appeared from the kitchen, and hurried to her father's side. "I thought you'd be asleep." Harrison Kincaid had once been a formidable man, tall and broad-shouldered like his late wife. Now he was a shadow of himself, his frame gaunt beneath the bedcovers, his once ruddy complexion ashen. But his eyes, the same warm brown as Willow's, remained sharp and alert. "Can't sleep all day," he said, attempting to push himself upright. "Got to keep my wits about me." Willow gently assisted him, adjusting his pillows so he could sit comfortably. "Dr. Farley says rest is the best medicine. Dr. Farley would have me in my grave already if I listened to all his advice." Her father's attempt at humor fell flat as a coughing spell overtook him. When it subsided, he looked at her with concern. "You're flushed, my dear. Did something happen in town?" Willow hesitated. Her father had always been able to read her like one of his law books. Nothing of importance, just the usual bustle. She poured him a glass of water from the pitcher on his bedside table. "I ran into Zachariah Irving. Well, not exactly ran into. He helped me when I dropped my basket." Her father's eyebrows rose. "Irving, the cattle driver." At her nod, he looked thoughtful. "Good man, from what I hear. Keeps his word, pays his debts. Had a case involving one of his trail hands last year, assault charge. Irving showed up in court, spoke on the man's behalf. Measured, honest testimony. I was impressed." Willow was surprised. Her father was not easily impressed, especially by men without formal education or social standing. He seemed Kind, she admitted. Kindness is undervalued these days. Her father took her hand, his grip weaker than it once was but still reassuring. You know, Willow, I worry about leaving you alone. Papa, don't let me finish. He squeezed her hand. You're the most capable woman I know, smart as a whip with a heart to match, but this world isn't kind to women alone, especially. He trailed off, but Willow knew what remained unsaid. Especially women who look like you. I'll be fine, she assured him, though they both knew her prospects were limited. Her father's estate would provide for her financially, but the loneliness that stretched before her was a different matter entirely. You deserve happiness, my girl. Real happiness. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Willow nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her father meant well, but his words only emphasized the gap between what she deserved and what the world was willing to offer someone like her. Later that evening, after her father had eaten a small portion of dinner and fallen asleep, Willow sat on the porch swing, watching as the last light faded from the sky. San Diego's mild climate meant even early autumn evenings were pleasant, and she often found solace in these quiet moments. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A lone rider was approaching along the road that led past their property. As the figure drew closer, Willow's breath caught in her throat. Even in the dimming light, she recognized the broad shoulders and easy posture of Zachariah Irving. He slowed as he neared the house and, to her shock, turned into their drive. Willow stood, smoothing her skirts nervously as he approached. What could possibly bring him here, Miss Kincaid? He dismounted with fluid grace, removing his hat as he stepped toward the porch. Hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Mr. Irving. She fought to keep her voice steady. What brings you to our home? He held up a small leather-bound book. Found this after you left the marketplace. Figured it must be yours. Willow recognized her journal with a jolt of surprise. She hadn't even realized she'd lost it. The thought of her private thoughts potentially being read by a stranger sent a wave of embarrassment through her. Did you? I mean, thank you for returning it. She took the book from his outstretched hand. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. Didn't read it, if that's what you're asking. Not my place to pry into a lady's private thoughts. Relief washed over her. Thank you, it would have been uncomfortable if it had fallen into the wrong hands. Figured as much. He glanced past her toward the house. Your father doing all right? Heard he's been ailing. He has good days and bad, Willow admitted. Today was somewhere in between. Zachariah nodded, his expression serious. My mother suffered with consumption. Took her 3 years before it finally claimed her. Tough thing to watch. The simple acknowledgement of her situation, without pity or platitudes, touched something in Willow. Would you like to come in? I could offer you some coffee or tea before you ride back to town. The invitation surprised them both. Willow rarely entertained visitors, especially not men she barely knew. But something about Zachariah Irving's straightforward manner put her at ease. He hesitated, then nodded. Coffee would be welcome if it's not too much trouble. Willow led him inside, suddenly conscious of every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, of his tall presence behind her in the narrow hallway. In the kitchen, she busied herself with preparing coffee, grateful for the familiar task to occupy her hands. You've got a nice place here, Zachariah remarked, looking around the warm, well-appointed kitchen. Reminds me a bit of my aunt's home back in Texas. Same feeling of welcome to it. Thank you. Willow placed 2 cups on the table. It was my mother's pride. She passed when I was 12, but I've tried to keep things as she would have wanted. You've done well. He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Sorry about your mother. Losing a parent young leaves a mark. You speak from experience. Lost my father when I was 14. Hunting accident. He took a sip of coffee. Left me and my younger brother to fend for ourselves mostly. Our aunt took us in, but she had 5 of her own to worry about. Willow found herself wanting to know more about this quiet, observant man. Is that how you ended up driving cattle? A smile touched his lips. In a roundabout way, started working ranches at 15. Learned I had a knack for handling stock and men both. Saved up, bought my own small herd 3 years back, been building it since. That's impressive. And it was. To build something from nothing required determination and intelligence, qualities Willow respected. Just doing what needs doing. He seemed uncomfortable with the praise. What about you? Judge's daughter must have had plenty of schooling. I attended Miss Porter's school back east until Mother died. After that, I couldn't bear to leave Father alone. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. I've continued my education through books and correspondence courses. Smart and loyal. He said it matter-of-factly as though stating something obvious. Rare combination. Willow felt her cheeks warm at the simple compliment. Before she could respond, the sound of coughing came from her father's room. "Excuse me," she said, rising quickly. "I should check on him." Zachariah stood as well. "I should be going anyway. Trail starts early tomorrow." "You're leaving San Diego?" Willow was surprised by the disappointment that flooded through her at the thought. "Just for a few weeks. Taking a herd up to Los Angeles." He reached for his hat. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Kincaid." "Willow," she said impulsively. "You can call me Willow." His green eyes held hers for a long moment. "Zachariah, or Zach, to those who know me well." The coughing from her father's room grew more insistent. Willow nodded regretfully. "Safe travels, Zachariah." After showing him out, she hurried to her father's room, pushing aside the strange feeling of loss that had settled in her chest. It was foolish to feel anything at all about a man she'd just met, a man who had simply shown her basic courtesy. Yet that night, as she lay in bed, Willow found herself replaying their conversation, remembering the way he looked at her without judgment or discomfort. It had been refreshing. Nothing more. She told herself it didn't matter that he was leaving tomorrow. Their paths had crossed briefly, and now would diverge again. That was life, especially hers. Better to accept it than to nurture foolish hopes that would only lead to disappointment. But as sleep finally claimed her, Willow's last thought was of green eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface, to the person she was beneath. The following weeks brought a dramatic change to the Kincaid household. Judge Harrison Kincaid's health took a sharp decline, leaving Willow in a constant state of anxiety and exhaustion. Dr. Farley visited daily, his expression growing grimmer with each examination. The consumption had spread to both lungs, he explained gently, and there was little more that could be done except to keep the judge comfortable. Willow threw herself into caring for her father, barely leaving his side except when Mrs. Holloway insisted on relieving her. Sleep came in fitful bursts, usually in the chair beside his bed. Food lost its appeal, and even Mrs. Holloway's concerned observations about her decreased appetite couldn't motivate her to eat properly. It was during one particularly difficult night, when her father's breathing had become so labored that each inhalation seemed like it might be his last, that Willow found herself thinking of Zachariah Irving. She wondered where he was on his cattle drive, if he'd reached Los Angeles yet. If he ever spared a thought for the judge's daughter, he'd met briefly in San Diego. The memory of their conversation provided a momentary distraction from the grim vigil she kept, a small spark of something other than grief and fear to focus on. Mourning brought no improvement. If anything, her father seemed weaker, his once commanding voice now barely a whisper. "Willow," he rasped, his eyes finding hers with effort. "My dear girl." "I'm here, Papa." She took his hand, alarmed at how cold his fingers felt despite the room's warmth. "Can I get you anything? Some water, perhaps?" He shook his head slightly. "Time for that is past." His breathing grew more labored. "Listen to me. My lawyer, Mr. Simmons, has all the papers. You'll be provided for." "Papa, please don't talk like that. You need to rest and no time." His grip tightened fractionally on hers. "Promise me something." "Anything," Willow whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Don't hide yourself away. You deserve happiness, a full life." His eyes held hers with sudden clarity. "Don't let fear keep you from living." Willow could only nod, her throat too tight for words. Her father's eyes drifted closed, his breathing becoming more shallow. She sat with him through the morning and into the afternoon, Mrs. Holloway bringing her tea that grew cold, untouched, on the bedside table. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor, Harrison Kincaid drew his final breath. It was so gentle, so undramatic, that for a moment Willow didn't realize what had happened. Then the stillness registered, the absence of the raspy breathing that had become the soundtrack to her days. "Oh, Papa," she whispered, laying her head on his chest where no heartbeat answered. The grief came then, not in the dramatic sobs she might have expected, but in a hollow ache that seemed to empty her from the inside out. Mrs. Holloway found her like that some time later, gently coaxed her away, and sent for Dr. Farley and the undertaker. The next days passed in a blur of arrangements and condolences. San Diego's prominent citizens came to pay their respects, their words of sympathy washing over Willow without truly penetrating the fog of her grief. The funeral was well attended, a testament to her father's standing in the community. Willow stood dry-eyed beside the grave, accepting handshakes and embraces with mechanical politeness. It was only when the last mourners had departed, leaving her alone at the freshly turned earth, that she allowed herself to truly feel the enormity of her loss. "I don't know how to do this without you," she whispered to the grave. "How to be alone." The autumn wind carried no answer, rustling the leaves of the nearby oak trees in a melancholy whisper. Willow remained until the lengthening shadows reminded her that night was approaching, then reluctantly turned toward home, a home that would never again echo with her father's voice. The days that followed took on a numbing sameness. Willow rose, dressed, ate whatever Mrs. Holloway placed before her, and moved through the house like a ghost. Mr. Simmons, her father's lawyer, came to discuss the estate, explaining that she was now a woman of independent means. The house was hers, along with investments that would provide a modest but comfortable income for life. She should have felt grateful for her father's foresight, but instead felt only a detached acknowledgement of her changed circumstances. It was Mrs. Holloway who finally broke through her stupor, nearly a month after the funeral. "You can't go on like this, Miss Willow." The housekeeper stood in the doorway of the parlor where Willow had been staring unseeing at the same page of a book for over an hour. "Your father wouldn't want it." "Want what, Mrs. Holloway?" Willow's voice sounded strange to her own ears, unused after days of near silence. "This. Fading away." "You're not eating proper, barely sleeping from what I can tell." The older woman's usually stern face softened. "I promised your mother I'd look after you, and I aim to keep that promise. I'm fine." "You're not, but you will be." Mrs. Holloway crossed the room with determined steps. "Tomorrow you're going into town with me. We need supplies, and you need air that hasn't been trapped inside these walls for weeks." Willow wanted to protest, to retreat back into the numbing routine she'd established, but something in Mrs. Holloway's expression stopped her. Perhaps it was time to try, even in this small way, to rejoin the world. "All right," she conceded. "Tomorrow." The trip into town the next day was both more and less difficult than Willow had anticipated. The familiar sights and sounds of San Diego's streets were jarring after her self-imposed isolation. But there was also something comforting about the normalcy of it all, the world continuing to turn, despite her personal tragedy. Several acquaintances stopped to express belated condolences, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and curiosity about how Judge Kincaid's daughter was faring alone. Willow received their words graciously, if briefly, eager to complete their errands and return home. They were just leaving the general store when a commotion at the far end of the street caught everyone's attention. A group of riders was approaching, trail-worn and dust-covered, leading a small herd of cattle. Even at a distance, Willow recognized the lead rider's straight-backed posture and broad shoulders. Zachariah Irving had returned to San Diego. Her heart gave an unexpected lurch at the sight of him. He looked much as he had when she'd last seen him, though perhaps a bit leaner after weeks on the trail. As the riders drew closer, Willow found herself frozen in place, uncertain whether to acknowledge him or slip away before he noticed her. The decision was taken from her when his gaze swept the street and landed on her. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by something she couldn't interpret. He said something to the man riding beside him, then broke away from the group, guiding his horse through the crowded street toward where she stood. "Miss Kincaid," he said as he dismounted, removing his hat. His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep with that slight rasp. "It's good to see you." "Mr. Irving." Willow was startled by how pleased she felt at his simple greeting. "Welcome back to San Diego." His green eyes studied her face, his expression sobering. "I heard about your father while I was in Los Angeles. I'm sorry for your loss." The simple, direct condolence, free from the usual platitudes, touched her. "Thank you." Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat pointedly behind them, and Willow flushed, realizing she'd forgotten the housekeeper's presence. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Mr. Zachariah Irving." "Mr. Irving, our housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway." The older woman gave Zachariah a measuring look. "Mr. Irving," he nodded respectfully. "Madam." An awkward silence fell, broken when Zachariah turned back to Willow. "I don't mean to keep you, but I wondered if I might call on you sometime to pay my respects properly." The request was so unexpected that for a moment Willow couldn't formulate a response. Why would a man like Zachariah Irving want to call on her? Courtesy, perhaps, or pity for a woman newly bereft. Either way, she found herself nodding. Yes, of course. That would be acceptable. A ghost of a smile touched his lips at her formal response. "Tomorrow afternoon, unless that's too soon." "Tomorrow would be fine," Willow said, ignoring Mrs. Holloway's surprised intake of breath beside her. "Until then." He replaced his hat, nodded to them both, and remounted his horse with easy grace. Willow watched as he rejoined his companions, leading them and their cattle toward the stockyards at the edge of town. "Well now," Mrs. Holloway said as they began walking back toward their wagon. "That's interesting." "It's nothing," Willow replied quickly, "just a courtesy call." The housekeeper made a non-committal sound that managed to convey skepticism without actual words. "He seems a decent sort. Your father spoke well of him, as I recall." "He did." Willow was surprised that Mrs. Holloway remembered such a passing comment. The older woman helped Willow into the wagon before climbing up herself. "Well, we'll need to air out the parlor when we get home, and perhaps you might want to wear your blue dress tomorrow. It brings out the color in your cheeks." "Mrs. Holloway." Willow felt heat rising in her face. "It's not that kind of visit." "Of course not," the housekeeper agreed, though her expression suggested otherwise. "But there's no harm in looking your best, is there?" Despite her protests, Willow found herself considering the blue dress as they drove home. It was newer than most of her wardrobe, made just before her father fell ill, and did flatter her coloring. But the idea that she would dress up for Zachariah Irving, as though his good opinion mattered to her, as though she were the kind of woman who might catch a man's eye. No, she decided firmly. She would receive him politely, accept his condolences, and that would be the end of it. Anything else was simply setting herself up for disappointment. Yet the next morning, Willow found herself taking extra care with her appearance, selecting the blue dress after all and arranging her chestnut hair more carefully than she had in weeks. She told herself it was simply a return to normal standards after her period of deepest mourning, nothing to do with her expected visitor. Mrs. Holloway, wisely, made no comment about her appearance, though Willow caught the housekeeper's approving nod as she descended the stairs. By the time the clock struck 2 in the afternoon, Willow had rearranged the parlor flowers 3 times and checked her reflection in the mirror twice as often. She was annoyed with herself for this uncharacteristic nervousness. It was just a condolence call, nothing more. When the knock finally came at precisely 3 o'clock, Willow forced herself to wait a full minute before nodding to Mrs. Holloway to answer the door. She stood in the parlor, hands clasped before her, the very picture of composed dignity. That composure threatened to crack when Zachariah entered the room. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance as well. His clothes were clean and pressed, his dark hair neatly trimmed, though still curling slightly at the ends. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as he crossed the threshold. "Miss Kincaid," he said, his deep voice filling the room, "thank you for receiving me, Mr. Irving." Willow gestured to the sofa across from her chair. "Please sit down." He settled himself somewhat stiffly, looking slightly out of place in the feminine elegance of the parlor. Mrs. Holloway appeared with tea and small cakes, which she arranged on the table between them before withdrawing with a meaningful look at Willow that clearly said, "Behave yourself." "How was your journey to Los Angeles?" Willow asked, pouring tea with hands she was determined to keep steady. "Uneventful, which is the best kind." He accepted the cup she offered. "Sold the herd for a good price, thinking of expanding operations next year." "That sounds promising." He nodded, then set his cup down carefully. "Miss Kincaid, Willow, I didn't come here just to offer condolences, though I am truly sorry about your father." Surprise flickered through her. "Oh, I've been thinking about you since we met." He said it directly, without artifice or flowery language. "Couldn't seem to get you out of my mind, even on the trail." Willow stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I don't understand. I'm not explaining myself well." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that suggested genuine nervousness. "The thing is, I'd like to get to know you better. If you'd be willing." "Get to know me," Willow repeated, feeling strangely disconnected from the conversation as if it were happening to someone else. "Why?" The blunt question seemed to take him aback. "Why wouldn't I?" Willow gave a small, disbelieving laugh. "Mr. Irving, I appreciate your courtesy, but we both know that men like you don't pursue friendships with women like me. At least, not the kind that are acknowledged in public." His brow furrowed. "Women like you, please don't make me say it." Heat crept up her neck. "I'm not blind to my appearance. I know what people see when they look at me." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like anger. "You think because you're not some skinny slip of a girl, I couldn't possibly be interested in knowing you." Put so bluntly, it sounded ridiculous, but wasn't it the reality she'd lived with her entire life? "It's been my experience." "Then you've been surrounded by fools." He leaned forward, his green eyes intent on hers. "When I look at you, Willow Kincaid, I see a woman of intelligence and grace. I see someone who cared for her father with devotion and strength. I see eyes that a man could drown in, and a smile that's all too rare." Willow's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such direct admiration. It was disorienting, like stepping onto what appeared to be solid ground only to find it shifting beneath your feet. "You don't know me," she managed finally. "I'd like to." His voice softened. "If you'll let me." It was tempting, so tempting to believe him. But years of disappointment and self-protective isolation weren't easily overcome. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Irving?" "Zachariah," he corrected gently. "And I'm proposing that you allow me to call on you properly. Take you for drives, perhaps dinner at the hotel when you feel ready to socialize again. Nothing improper, nothing rushed." Willow studied him, looking for signs of insincerity or mockery, but found only earnest interest in his expression. Still, caution held her back. "I need time," she said finally. "This is unexpected," he nodded, seeming unsurprised by her hesitation. "Of course, you've suffered a great loss. I wouldn't want to intrude on your grief." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "But I'll be in San Diego for the foreseeable future. When you're ready, if you're ready, you can send word to the Grand Hotel. That's where I'm staying while I look for more permanent accommodations." Willow rose as well, walking him to the parlor door. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Irving." "Zachariah," he reminded her with a small smile. "And thank you for the tea." At the front door, he paused, turning back to her with an expression of such gentle determination that it made her heart skip. "I meant what I said, Willow. I couldn't get you out of my mind. I'd like the chance to show you why." Then he was gone, striding down the path to where his horse waited, leaving Willow staring after him with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Mrs. Holloway appeared beside her, watching Zachariah ride away. Well, what?" Willow closed the door, turning to face the housekeeper's knowing gaze. What did Mr. Irving have to say for himself? Willow hesitated, then decided there was little point in being evasive. Mrs. Holloway would pry it out of her eventually. "He wants to call on me, properly." The older woman's eyebrows rose. "And what did you say?" "That I needed time." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "Sensible, make him work for it a bit." At Willow's shocked expression, she chuckled. "Oh, don't look so scandalized. I was young once too, you know." "It's not like that," Willow protested weakly. "He's just being kind." "Men like that don't spend time with women out of mere kindness," Mrs. Holloway said with the certainty of long experience. "He's interested, child. The question is, are you, was she?" Willow wasn't sure she knew. Zachariah Irving intrigued her, certainly. He was handsome and direct, seemingly honest in his intentions. But she'd built walls around her heart for so long that the idea of lowering them, even slightly, was terrifying. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never. This isn't something I expected." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "Your father would want you to be happy, child, to live fully, not just exist in this house like a ghost." She patted Willow's arm. "Think on it. But don't think too long. A man like that won't wait forever." The days that followed were filled with an internal debate that left Willow restless and distracted. Part of her wanted to believe Zachariah's interest was genuine, while another part, the cautious, self-protective part that had been reinforced by years of social judgment, warned that disappointment was inevitable. Men simply didn't court women of her size, not seriously. Perhaps he was new enough to San Diego that he hadn't yet heard the whispers, the not-so-subtle jokes at her expense. A week passed, then another. Willow ventured into town more frequently, half hoping, half dreading that she might encounter Zachariah. She never did. Though she occasionally heard mentions of him, he was indeed looking for property, apparently planning to establish a more permanent base in the area. It was during one such trip, as she was leaving the millinery shop, that Willow overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. "Irving seems to be settling in," a man's voice said from around the corner. "Bought that parcel of land out by the creek, I hear." "Smart investment," another voice replied. "But that's not the interesting part. Rumor has it he's sweet on Judge Kincaid's daughter." Willow froze, her hand on the shop door. "The fat one." "Surely not." The first man laughed. "What would a man like Irving want with her?" "Her inheritance, most likely," the second man replied. "Judge left her comfortable, and Irving's looking to expand his operation. Needs capital, I expect." "Well, she'd be lucky to get any man, even if he is just after her money." The crude laughter that followed burned through Willow like acid. She stood paralyzed, mortification and hurt washing over her in waves. This was exactly what she'd feared, that any interest in her could only be motivated by ulterior motives, that her body made her unlovable, and her money made her a target. Gathering what dignity she could muster, Willow pushed through the door and walked swiftly past the two men, who fell silent at her appearance. She didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their presence in any way, though she felt their gazes following her down the street. By the time she reached her carriage, tears were threatening, but she held them back through sheer force of will. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. The drive home was a blur. Once safely inside, Willow retreated to her room, ignoring Mrs. Holloway's concerned questions. Only when the door was locked behind her did she allow the tears to come, hot and bitter. How foolish she'd been to even consider Zachariah's offer. Of course it wasn't genuine interest. What man would look at her and see anything but a means to an end? The inheritance, the comfort she could provide, that was the attraction, not her. Her father's words echoed in her memory. "You deserve happiness, my girl, real happiness." But perhaps he'd been wrong. Perhaps some people weren't meant for that kind of joy. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Willow," Mrs. Holloway called. "There's someone here to see you." Willow hastily wiped her tears. "I'm not receiving visitors today. It's Mr. Irving." The housekeeper's voice lowered, "And he seems mighty determined." "Zachariah. Here. Now." Willow's heart raced with a mixture of emotions, anger, hurt, and beneath it all, a treacherous spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. "Tell him I'm indisposed." There was a pause then. "He says he'll wait, all day if necessary. Stubborn man." Willow rose, glancing in the mirror and wincing at her tear-stained face. She couldn't see him like this, not when she was already so vulnerable. "Miss Willow," Mrs. Holloway knocked again. "Shall I bring you some cool water to wash your face? Perhaps the lavender scent to calm your nerves." The suggestion was practical and tempting. After a moment's hesitation, Willow unlocked the door, allowing the housekeeper to enter with the promised items. "He's in the parlor," Mrs. Holloway said as she poured water into the basin, "pacing like a caged mountain lion. Whatever's happened, he seems as upset as you are." "Nothing's happened," Willow said automatically, splashing the cool water on her face. "I just overheard some unkind speculation about his intentions toward me." Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Gossip, you mean? The truth, more likely." Willow patted her face dry. "Why else would a man like him show interest in someone like me?" "Perhaps because he has eyes in his head and sense in his brain," the housekeeper replied tartly. "Now, do you want me to send him away, or are you going to hear what he has to say?" Willow hesitated. Part of her, the hurt, defensive part, wanted to dismiss him without a hearing. But another part, perhaps braver, perhaps more foolish, wanted to see his face, to judge for herself whether the rumors had any foundation. "I'll see him," she decided. "But not in the parlor, the garden. It's more neutral ground." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "I'll tell him. 5 minutes." 10, Willow countered, glancing at her red-rimmed eyes in the mirror. "I need a moment." When she finally descended the back stairs and stepped onto the garden path 15 minutes later, Willow had regained her composure. Her face was freshly washed, her hair neatly arranged, and her expression carefully neutral. She would give nothing away until she understood his true motives. Zachariah was standing by the rose arbor, his back to her, hat in hand. He turned at the sound of her approach, and the expression on his face caught her off guard. He looked worried, genuinely concerned. "Willow," he said, taking a step toward her before stopping himself. "Are you all right? Mrs. Holloway said you were upset." "I'm fine." The coolness in her voice was deliberate. "What brings you here, Mr. Irving?" He frowned at the formal address but didn't comment on it. "I saw you in town. You looked distressed when you left the millinery shop." He hesitated. "I tried to catch up with you, but you drove away quickly. You were watching me." The idea was disconcerting. "No, not watching. I was across the street at the bank when I spotted you." His brow furrowed. "Something upset you. I'd like to know what." The directness of his concern nearly broke through her resolve, but Willow held firm. "Why do you care, Mr. Irving? We barely know each other." "I'd like to change that if you'd give me the chance." "Would you?" Willow couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Or are you more interested in what I can offer you? My inheritance, perhaps? Capital for your expanding business ventures?" Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like anger. "You heard something. Someone's been talking." "People often do," Willow replied, keeping her voice steady with effort, "especially about unlikely pairings." Zachariah's jaw tightened. "And you believed them?" It wasn't a question, but Willow felt compelled to answer anyway. "Why wouldn't I? It makes sense. You're new to town, establishing yourself. You need funds. She gestured vaguely at herself. Not exactly the kind of woman men pursue for her charms. The anger in his expression deepened, but to her surprise it didn't seem directed at her. "Whoever put that notion in your head is a damn fool." He closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. "Willow, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "I have no interest in your money. I don't need it. The cattle drive to Los Angeles was profitable enough that I've already purchased land outright, no loans needed. I'm building my own place with my own funds." "Then why?" She couldn't finish the question. "Why am I interested in you?" His expression softened. "Because from the moment I saw you in that marketplace, picking yourself up with dignity after that boy knocked you down, I couldn't look away. Because when we talked, I felt something I haven't felt in years, a connection. Because your eyes tell stories your lips don't, and I want to hear them all." The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. Willow wanted desperately to believe him, but years of self-doubt were not so easily overcome. "You could have any woman in San Diego," she said quietly. "Someone more suitable." "Suitable?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You mean someone thin and pretty with no substance beneath. No thank you." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Willow, I don't want any woman. I want to know you, just you." The intensity in his green eyes made her breath catch. No one had ever looked at her that way before, as if she were something precious, something worth fighting for. "I'm afraid," she admitted finally, the words barely audible, his expression gentled. "Of what? Of believing you, of hoping, of being disappointed." "I can't promise I'll never disappoint you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and took her hand in his. "But I can promise I'll never lie to you. What I feel is real, Willow. Let me prove it to you." His hand was warm around hers, calloused from work yet gentle in its grip. Willow looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, searching for any sign of deception or mockery. She found none, only open, earnest determination. "How?" she asked softly. "One day at a time." His thumb brushed lightly across her knuckles, sending an unexpected shiver up her arm. Let me call on you properly, take you for drives, talk with you, get to know the woman who's captured my thoughts these past weeks. It was terrifying, the prospect of opening herself to potential hurt. But looking into Zachariah's eyes, Willow found her fear matched by an equal measure of hope, fragile, new, but undeniably present. "All right," she said finally. "One day at a time." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night, warm and full of promise. "Thank you." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I won't make you regret it." As he left her garden that afternoon, Willow wasn't certain whether she'd just made the bravest or the most foolish decision of her life. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than grief or resignation when she thought about the future. She felt possibility. True to his word, Zachariah began calling on Willow regularly. At first, their meetings were carefully supervised by Mrs. Holloway, who maintained a discreet but watchful presence during his visits. They would sit in the parlor or on the veranda, talking for hours about everything and nothing: his plans for his newly purchased land, her love of literature, the places they'd both seen and those they hoped to visit someday. Gradually, as autumn deepened toward winter, their outings expanded beyond the confines of her home. Zachariah would arrive with his buggy on clear afternoons, helping Willow up with a gentle hand that lingered just a moment longer than strictly necessary. They would drive along the coast, the Pacific stretching endlessly beside them, or inland toward the rolling hills that surrounded San Diego. On these drives, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues, Willow found herself relaxing, her customary reserve melting under Zachariah's attentive gaze. He listened when she spoke, really listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her thoughts. And when he talked about his own life growing up in Texas, the struggles after his father's death, his determination to build something of his own, she glimpsed the depth of character beneath his quiet exterior. "What made you choose cattle ranching?" she asked him one afternoon as they sat on a blanket overlooking the valley, a picnic basket between them. The December air was cool but pleasant, typical of San Diego's mild winters. Zachariah considered the question, taking a bite of the apple tart Mrs. Holloway had packed for them. "Freedom, I suppose. I didn't want to be bound to one place, working someone else's land." He glanced at her with a small smile. "Though that's changing now. Because of your property purchase, partly." His gaze held hers, and Willow felt her cheeks warm under its intensity. "Partly because I'm finding reasons to put down roots." Such moments, when his meaning was clear but not explicitly stated, were becoming more frequent. Zachariah was a patient man, never pushing beyond the boundaries of propriety. But Willow was increasingly aware of the current that ran beneath their companionable conversations. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race, only for him to quickly shift back to safer topics. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. The town noticed, of course. San Diego might be growing, but it was still small enough that the judge's daughter being courted by the newcomer cattleman was fodder for gossip. Willow felt the stares when they attended church together, heard the whispers when they dined at the Grand Hotel. Some were merely curious, others openly disapproving. "Does it bother you?" she asked Zachariah one evening as they walked back to her house after dinner, Mrs. Holloway following at a discreet distance behind them. "The talk," he shrugged, his shoulder brushing against hers as they walked. "People will always talk, doesn't mean we have to listen. But they say such unkind things." Willow kept her voice low, though the words still pained her to voice. "About why you might be interested in me." Zachariah stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the lamplight his eyes were dark and serious. "Let them talk. I know why I'm here." He reached up, his fingers hovering near her cheek without quite touching it. "Do you?" Willow's breath caught in her throat. "I think so." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Good." As winter gave way to spring, Willow found herself transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The grief for her father remained, a quiet ache that would never fully disappear, but it was no longer all-consuming. Color returned to her world, along with a tentative joy she'd never expected to feel again. Her physical appearance changed too, though not in the way San Diego's gossips might have predicted. She didn't become slimmer, her form remained as ample as ever, but there was a new confidence in how she carried herself. The defensive hunch of her shoulders gradually straightened, and she began selecting dresses in brighter colors, no longer trying to hide in drab, forgettable shades. "You look beautiful today," Zachariah told her one Sunday after church, his eyes appreciative as they took in her new dress of cornflower blue. "That color suits you." "Thank you." The compliment still flustered her, but she no longer immediately dismissed it as mere politeness. Zachariah didn't say things he didn't mean. Mrs. Holloway noticed the changes too. "You're blooming," the housekeeper remarked one evening as she helped Willow prepare for dinner at Zachariah's newly completed ranch house. "Like one of those desert plants after a rain." Willow smiled at the comparison. "I feel different, more myself somehow." "That's what happens when you're seen." Mrs. Holloway secured a final pin in Willow's hair. "Really seen by someone who matters." The observation was surprisingly perceptive. Zachariah did see her, not just her size or her status or her inheritance, but her thoughts, her feelings, her strengths and vulnerabilities. In his company, Willow felt truly visible for perhaps the first time in her adult life. The dinner at his ranch marked a turning point. Zachariah had invited several of his business associates and their wives, making it a proper social gathering rather than a private affair. It was his way of declaring his intentions publicly. Willow realized presenting her as the woman he was courting, without shame or secrecy. His ranch house was modest but well built, with clean lines and practical furnishings that reflected his straightforward nature. The dining room could comfortably seat 10, and the table was set with simple but elegant china that Willow suspected was newly purchased for the occasion. "What do you think?" Zachariah asked quietly as he showed her around before the other guests arrived. "It's not as grand as your home, but it's wonderful," Willow interrupted, meaning it. The house felt welcoming and solid, like the man himself. "You've created something special here." His expression warmed at her approval. "It's still a work in progress. There are things I'd change." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "If I knew what might make it more appealing to someone who might share it someday." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Willow felt her heart quicken at the thought of what he was suggesting, a future together. The dinner itself went smoothly, with Zachariah a surprisingly adept host. His business associates were respectful, if curious about the relationship, while their wives alternated between thinly veiled surprise and genuine warmth toward Willow. She handled it all with a grace that would have been impossible months earlier, before Zachariah had helped her rediscover her own worth. As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, Zachariah walked Willow and Mrs. Holloway to the carriage. The housekeeper, sensing the couple's desire for a private moment, busied herself with arranging her skirts inside. "Thank you for coming tonight," Zachariah said, taking both of Willow's hands in his. "It meant a lot to me. I enjoyed it." She smiled up at him. "Your friends seem to approve of your new home. I'm more interested in whether you approve." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "Willow, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart leapt to her throat. "Yes." But before he could continue, Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat loudly from the carriage. "It's getting late, Miss Willow. We should be heading back." Frustration flickered briefly across Zachariah's face, but he composed himself quickly. "Another time, then." He helped Willow into the carriage, his hand lingering on hers. "Soon." The drive back to town seemed longer than usual, with Willow's thoughts racing ahead. What had Zachariah been about to ask? The obvious possibility both thrilled and terrified her. Was she ready? Was this real? "He's going to propose, Mrs. Holloway stated matter-of-factly once they were well on their way. "If not tonight, then soon." Willow stared at the housekeeper. "You don't know that. Child, I've seen the way that man looks at you. He's been building up to this for months." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "The question is, what will you say when he does?" It was a question Willow had been asking herself with increasing frequency. Zachariah had become essential to her happiness in ways she'd never anticipated. The thought of life without his steady presence, his quiet strength, his unwavering belief in her worth, was unbearable to contemplate. Yet doubt still lingered, not about his feelings, which he demonstrated daily in countless small ways, but about her own worthiness. Could she make him happy, truly happy for a lifetime? Would there come a day when he would look at her and wish he'd chosen differently? "I don't know," she admitted, though her heart whispered otherwise. Mrs. Holloway snorted softly. "Yes, you do. You're just afraid to admit it." Perhaps she was right. Fear had governed too much of Willow's life already, fear of ridicule, of rejection, of hope itself. Hadn't she promised her father she would try to live fully? Didn't she owe herself the chance at happiness that Zachariah seemed determined to offer? The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Willow was in the garden, tending to the roses her mother had planted years ago, when she heard the now familiar sound of Zachariah's horse approaching. Her heart quickened as she straightened, brushing soil from her gloved hands. He wasn't expected today. They had no planned outing or engagement. His unexpected arrival could only mean one thing. Zachariah appeared at the garden gate, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. His usually confident posture was slightly tense, and he gripped his hat a bit too tightly. "Zachariah," Willow said, smiling despite the butterflies in her stomach. "This is a surprise. A good one, I hope." He entered the garden, closing the gate behind him. "I couldn't wait any longer." "For what?" He crossed to her, taking her gloved hands in his. "Willow, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Every day I spend with you makes me more certain of what I want." She held her breath, hardly daring to believe this was happening. "When we met, you thought love was impossible for you." His voice was low, intimate. "I've spent every day since trying to prove otherwise. I want to keep proving it every morning for the rest of our lives." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes as Zachariah lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Willow Kincaid, I love you, your mind, your heart, your soul, your body exactly as it is." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "Will you marry me? Let me spend my life showing you how much you deserve to be loved." The ring inside the box was simple but beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in gold. It glinted in the morning sunlight, a tangible symbol of the future he was offering. For a moment, Willow couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. All the doubts, all the fears that had haunted her for years seemed to fall away, leaving only the truth she could no longer deny. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly. "Yes, Zachariah, I'll marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise of all that was to come. Willow melted into his embrace, feeling for the first time in her life truly at home. "I love you," she murmured against his lips when they finally parted. "I never thought I could have this." Zachariah cupped her face in his hands, his green eyes intense with emotion. "Get used to it, Willow Irving. I plan to remind you every morning for the rest of our lives." And he did. Their wedding, held that autumn in the garden where he had proposed, was small but joyous. Willow wore a gown of ivory silk that celebrated rather than concealed her curves, designed by a seamstress in Los Angeles who specialized in fashions for women of ample proportions. Zachariah's eyes had misted when he first saw her walking toward him, his expression one of such undisguised adoration that even the most skeptical guests were moved. They made their home at Zachariah's ranch, which expanded and flourished under their joint care. Willow brought her father's books and her mother's china, blending their histories into something new and wholly theirs. The spare bedroom became a library, walls lined with shelves that Zachariah built himself, understanding how important books were to his wife. San Diego grew and changed around them, but the rhythms of ranch life remained constant. Zachariah's cattle operation prospered, allowing them a comfortable life without ostentation. They became known for their hospitality, their home often filled with friends and business associates, who invariably left commenting on the palpable happiness that permeated the Irving household. True to his promise, Zachariah found ways each morning to show Willow how real his love was. Sometimes it was as simple as a cup of coffee brought to her before she rose, or a wildflower left on her pillow. Other times it was the way he looked at her across the breakfast table, as if even after years together, he still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. In their third year of marriage, Willow gave birth to a son, Harrison Zachariah Irving, named for her father. The boy had his father's green eyes and his mother's generous heart, growing into a child who approached the world with open curiosity and kindness. 2 years later, twins followed a boy and girl, Thomas and Elizabeth, completing their family. Motherhood brought new curves to Willow's already ample figure, but Zachariah's appreciation never wavered. If anything, he seemed to find her more beautiful with each passing year, his touch always reverent, his gaze always admiring. "How do you do it?" Willow asked him once as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, 20 years into their marriage. Their children were nearly grown, with Harrison already showing a keen interest in taking over the ranch someday. "How do you still look at me as if I'm the most beautiful woman you've ever seen?" Zachariah propped himself up on one elbow, his face visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. Silver now threaded through his dark hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his gaze was as intense as ever. "Because you are," he said simply. "More beautiful now than the day we met, because now I know your soul as well as your body." His hand traced the curve of her hip, familiar and still exciting after all these years. "I thank God every day that those fools in San Diego couldn't see what was right in front of them. Their blindness was my blessing." Willow smiled, reaching up to touch his beloved face, "and to think I almost let fear keep me from this life. But you didn't." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "You were brave enough to believe that you deserved love, brave enough to let me love you." "The best decision I ever made," she whispered, "for both of us." He gathered her close, her curves fitting perfectly against his lean frame as they had from the very beginning. "Sleep now, my love. Morning will be here soon." And in the morning, as always, he would find some new way to show her that their love was real, that it had always been real, from that first moment in the marketplace when he'd helped her to her feet, and looked at her, truly looked at her, and seen the woman no one else had bothered to see. For Willow Irving, formerly Kincaid, love had once seemed impossible. But Zachariah had made it not only possible but constant, as reliable as the sunrise that greeted them each new day of their shared life.